Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter what time zone you're in. Welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe.
I'm Sunny.
For all of our Sip and Talkers tuning in today, get ready because we are brewing a very, very bitter cup of coffee for this one.
Oh, yeah. A highly caffeinated, incredibly tense brew today. It is heavily spiked with, well, geopolitical gunpowder and some really deep water cross-strait discord.
Exactly. We are looking at a global stress test of boundaries today. But before we take that first sip, let's lay down a quick foundation.
Right. The ground rules.
Yeah. We are analyzing all these current events through a strictly impartial international lens. Our whole goal here is just to encourage your independent, critical thinking.
Absolutely. We are not taking political sides here, and we aren't criticizing or discriminating against any nation or group, just exploring objective facts.
Right. And quick heads up, later on we're going to get pretty deep into the weeds of semiconductor supply chains and corporate tech moves.
Yes, so please remember, we are not financial advisors. All of this is an exploration of geopolitical mechanics, not a guide for your investment portfolio.
Definitely not. So, with that out of the way, let's just look at the sheer volatility of the international news cycle lately.
It's intense.
It really is. Watching global diplomacy right now feels less like traditional statecraft and way more like an extreme sport.
That is a perfect way to put it. It's like a massive, highly unstable Jenga tower. You pull a block in the Middle East, and the entire top floor wobbles over in Asia.
Yeah, so let's start with that wobbly block in the Middle East, the United States and Iran.
Right.
We recently saw a ceasefire agreement put in place, which, seemed like this massive diplomatic win on paper, but it completely collapsed within 24 hours.
Barely even a day.
I mean, you can't even get a local package delivered that fast.
Yeah.
And a major international treaty just shatters. What is the actual mechanism behind a failure that rapid?
Well, it really comes down to the reality of proxy warfare. Basically, proxy conflicts override diplomatic signatures.
Right, because paper doesn't stop bullets.
Exactly. A piece of paper signed in a fancy boardroom doesn't instantly stop the fighting on the ground when you're dealing with decentralized actors.
So what actually happened in that 24-hour window?
So within hours, Iran accused Israel of continuing military strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran viewed this as a direct violation of the ceasefire's core conditions.
Okay, and what was the response to that?
Well, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu explicitly stated that the U.S.-Iran ceasefire did not affect his military plans in Lebanon whatsoever.
Oh, wow. So they just completely bypassed the agreement.
Yeah, you have a formal ceasefire structurally collapsing because the regional proxies and these parallel conflicts, they just operate on an entirely different set of rules.
And different timelines, too. And that structural collapse, it spills over directly into the global economy, specifically in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz.
Oh, the shipping bottlenecks. It's bad.
It's historically bad. This isn't just some regional dispute. It's a severe threat to the fundamental international principle of freedom of navigation.
Right, because officially, no one has declared the strait closed.
Right, well, officially it's open, but functionally. Shipping safety is completely non-existent. The recent data shows 29 ships have been attacked by Iran.
29? That's massive.
Yeah, and because the insurance premiums and the physical risks are just so astronomically high, traffic has plummeted. It's down to a tiny fraction of the pre-war norm.
Which used to be, what, like over 100 ships?
Yeah, I used to see about 138 massive cargo ships passing through every single day.
Wow. And that brings up the craziest part of all this, the crypto toll.
Oh my gosh, yes. Sip and Talkers, imagine a global shipping route suddenly halted because a nation demands a transit toll paid entirely in cryptocurrency.
It's wild. It sounds like a bizarre digital age version of 17th century piracy.
Right, like hand over your crypto or your cargo ships can't pass. Why are they demanding Bitcoin instead of regular money?
Because the U.S. effectively controls the traditional global banking system, specifically the SWIFT network.
Ah, so it's about dodging sanctions.
Exactly. If Iran demands transit fees in dollars or euros, those funds can be frozen instantly by Western sanctions.
So by demanding payment in decentralized cryptocurrency.
They are attempting to build an unsanctionable toll booth on one of the most critical physical waterways on Earth.
That is just, it's a perfect collision of digital finance and asymmetric warfare.
It really is. But, every conflict needs a mediator, or at least someone who desperately benefits from stability.
Which brings us to China.
Right. In all this chaos, China has stepped in to play a massive behind-the-scenes role in pushing for that initial ceasefire.
Yeah, even Trump recently acknowledged Beijing's influence in the region. But let's be real here. China isn't doing this just for global good karma.
Oh, definitely not. They are heavily reliant on Middle Eastern energy. If that oil stops flowing, their domestic economy just grinds to a halt.
Pure pragmatic necessity.
Exactly. But their success as a peace broker in the Middle East changes the global diplomatic math. It projects this image of China as a stabilizing superpower.
And this is where that Jenga tower wobbles over to Asia.
You see it, right. The Iranian challenge to the freedom of navigation status quo in the Middle East shares this really deep, subtle resonance with Taiwan's current debate over its own political status quo.
It really does. In both regions, everyone is currently testing exactly where the bottom line of the international order truly lies.
So let's pivot and jump into those deep waters of cross-strait discourse.
Yes, let's do it. So, in Taiwan, the status quo is the ultimate political buzzword. And just recently, the KMT chairman, Cheng Li-wen, visited Nanjing.
And that visit caused quite a stir.
A massive debate. The visit included a highly publicized stop at the Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum. And while he was there, the terms Republic of China and the 1992 Consensus were verbally invoked.
Right, which led to critics immediately labeling the KMT as anti-status quo.
Exactly. But before we get into why people are so mad about that, we actually need to define the term. In political science, what does the status quo actually mean here?
Broadly speaking, the political science definition of the cross-strait status quo is mutually not subordinate, but maintaining peace.
Okay, so neither side actively rules the other, and nobody is shooting at each other.
Right. And the criticism against the KMT stems from how the reality on the ground is actively evolving.
Evolving how?
Well, the current trajectory of Taiwan is increasingly seeking an independent international personality, like a distinct identity on the global stage.
Right, the Republic of China-Taiwan concept.
Exactly. So critics argue that the KMT's strict adherence to the historical One China concept and their opposition to Taiwan independence is actively pulling the island backward.
Pulling it backward into the unresolved framework of the Chinese Civil War.
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay, wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If Cheng Li-wen stood at the Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum in Nanjing, which is physically located on the mainland, and literally said the words Republic of China out loud, isn't that a bold assertion of sovereignty?
It sounds like it, right?
Yeah. How can critics say they're dragging Taiwan backward if they are explicitly stating their own national title on the other side of the strait?
That is the absolute crux of the debate, and it all comes down to the context of a location.
Location matters that much.
Oh, hugely. The Mainland Affairs Council deputy head, Liang Wenshai, provided this brilliant framing for it. He described the mausoleum as an ROC special protection zone.
Oh, wow. A special protection zone.
Yeah. The CCP permits the term Republic of China to be spoken there because it perfectly aligns with their own historical narrative.
Which is that the ROC is a completed chapter of history.
Exactly. It's safely entombed in the past.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Let me throw an analogy at you. It's like being a diehard fan of a specific sports team.
Okay, I like where this is going.
You are allowed to wear your team's jersey, but only when you are locked in the dark basement of your rival's house.
Yes.
You absolutely cannot wear it upstairs in the living room where the actual guests are.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. The true test of sovereignty isn't whispering your name in the basement.
Right.
The true test is whether those words, Republic of China, can be spoken as an equal at the Daohutai State Guest House in Beijing or directly in front of Xi Jinping.
At a formal bilateral summit.
Exactly. If you can only assert your identity in historically designated safe zones, critics argue you aren't demonstrating sovereignty, you are just participating in a curated historical reenactment.
A historical reenactment. That is a heavy way to look at it. But it makes sense. If you don't say Republic of China and only focus on One China in the living room, logically, it looks like you're accepting the PRC as the sole representative.
And that leads to a slippery slope regarding ruling rights over Taiwan.
So we basically have a situation where everyone is playing the same game, but using completely different rule books.
Let's break those rule books down, because to avoid an echo chamber here, we need to look at the three main perspectives.
Yes, the three dimensions of this debate. Let's start with perspective one. The KMTs seek common ground logic.
Right. For decades, their core strategy has been to intentionally blur the lines of sovereignty.
Blur them to buy peaceful space.
Exactly. They used the 1992 Consensus, to avoid triggering the CCP's anti-secession law and to keep the economy humming.
Keep the trade flowing, but there's a major contradiction there now, isn't there?
A massive one. Ambiguity only works if both parties consent to it. Today, the CCP has actively removed any room for different interpretations.
So they've squeezed the space.
Yeah. So when the larger power removes the ambiguity, the KMT's continued silence or agreement starts to look like an erosion of current sovereignty.
Which perfectly explains perspective two, the government's legal defense.
They are taking a very different approach.
Very different. They aren't relying on blurry historical agreements. They are shifting towards sovereignty in action.
Building physical and legal boundaries.
Yeah. Exactly. Sip&Talkers, look at the recent case with Taiwan's immigration agency. They outright banned a prominent Chinese influencer known as Dada Looks at the World.
Also known as Dr. Liang, right?
Yes, Dr. Liang. And he has an audience of 2.3 million followers. This wasn't a small deal.
So what were the mechanics of that ban? Because it wasn't just about his opinions.
No, it was behavioral. The influencer was actively degrading Taiwanese sovereignty in his content while physically standing on Taiwanese soil.
Oh, wow. What was he doing?
He was hanging the PRC flag, deliberately labeling locations in his videos as Taiwan, China, and broadcasting all of this to millions of people.
So he was banned for essentially abusing his travel visa to push a political narrative.
Exactly. It's an assertion of administrative power. The government is legally saying you cannot exploit our open system and travel here, while simultaneously producing content that denies our borders even exist.
It's a literal defense mechanism against cognitive warfare. They are building a legal boundary against the one China narrative.
Which brings us to perspective three, the CCP's internalization tactics.
This one is fascinating, because if Taiwan is trying to draw international boundaries, the CCP is trying to erase them legally.
Right, through domestic law.
Look at the legislation they passed in early 2026. The Ethnic Unity and Progress Promotion Law.
What does that actually do?
The strategy is to take the concept of reunification and bake it directly into their domestic legal framework. They are trying to legalize it internally.
So they write laws that treat Taiwan as if it is already a domestic province.
Exactly. And they use these visits from KMT officials as visual proof for the international community.
So when the opposition party visits, they plaster it all over the media.
Right, creating this heavily broadcasted two sides of the strait are one family image.
Which sends a huge signal to the U.S. And let's remember, the U.S. just showed how fragile their diplomatic power is with that broken Iran deal.
Exactly. The CCP is signaling to Washington that Taiwan is not a geopolitical flashpoint. It's just a messy domestic family dispute.
Don't get involved. It's an internal issue.
You got it. And you have to realize these abstract geopolitical strategies don't just float in the air. They crash violently into Taiwan's domestic policy.
Oh, absolutely. The pressure from the outside always dictates the political fights on the inside. And that is creating 4 massive domestic flashpoints for Taiwan in 2026.
Let's get into those, because the first one is arguably the most impactful globally.
Yes. Flashpoint 1 revolves entirely around tech and security. We are talking about the TCS National Security Act.
And that's CHIPS, pronounced just like the American snack, right?
Exactly like the snack, but we're dealing with advanced silicon, not potatoes. So the KMT is pushing for legislation that would require parliamentary approval before semiconductor giants, specifically TSMC, can build factories overseas.
So they want to put a legislative lock on foreign expansion.
Yes. Their rationale is that this prevents the hollowing out of Taiwan's economy. The argument is basically, if our most advanced tech leaves the island, our global leverage leaves the island.
Okay, but the critics of this act are pushing back hard.
Really hard.
They argue that this legislation fundamentally breaks Taiwan's silicon shield.
Can you explain the silicon shield real quick for our listeners?
Sure. It's the idea that Taiwan's absolute dominance in manufacturing the world's most advanced microchips makes it so economically vital that the U.S., Europe, and Japan would be forced to defend it in a crisis.
Right. If you go down, the global tech economy goes down with you.
Exactly. So critics argue that by legally chaining these companies to the island, you isolate Taiwan. You actually prevent critical technological integration with global allies.
Which makes Taiwan less relevant, not more.
Right.
You know, as someone who follows the tech scene closely, this debate is just wild to me. It's like watching a software company in a crisis debate what to do with their core proprietary code.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. Do you open source your code to become so deeply integrated into the global industry that everyone needs you to survive?
Or do you lock your servers in a highly secure, heavily guarded basement room?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the problem is, if you lock it in the basement, yeah, you have absolute control over it. But if the building itself catches fire, you're trapped alone.
That analogy highlights the vulnerability perfectly. It is a nearly impossible choice. Hoard your leverage or integrate it for protection.
And locking down the tech is only half the battle. If you're physically isolating your economy, you have to compensate politically.
Which leads directly into Flashpoint 2, the KMT CCP forums.
Right. So in February 2026, there was this major forum in Beijing that resulted in 15 proposed opinions.
Covering things like the normalization of travel, trade, and cultural exchanges.
But hold on, this raises a massive constitutional red flag for me.
How so?
Well, if an opposition party, a party that does not control the executive branch, is bypassing the elected government to negotiate these opinions with Beijing, doesn't that infringe on national administrative power?
That is exactly the legal and political friction point. The ruling party argues it undermines state sovereignty.
It feels like they're establishing a shadow diplomatic channel.
It does. And furthermore, the cultural rhetoric used at these forums is causing friction. They rely heavily on phrases like descendants of Yan and yellow emperors.
Oh, wow. That feels incredibly dated.
It is. It feels increasingly disconnected from reality. It clashes heavily with the self-identity of the younger Taiwanese generation.
Because they view themselves through a distinct modern democratic lens, right?
Exactly. Not some ancient mythological lineage.
So you have a generational identity crisis layered right on top of a geopolitical one.
It's a lot. And that friction brings us to Flashpoint 3, the intense debate over amending the Anti-Infiltration Act.
Okay, let's give a quick history lesson on this one. This law was enacted to prevent hostile foreign forces from illegally funding local political campaigns, media, or lobbying efforts.
Basic national security stuff.
Right. But now, the KMT wants to relax this law. They point to cases like the mainland spouse Zhu Chunying and argue that the current strictness is paralyzing normal, everyday, cross-strait business.
They argue it's essentially a witch hunt that hurts the economy.
Exactly. But look at the timing in the broader context here. We are in an incredibly fragile global period.
Very fragile.
We just discussed how the Iran war caused massive supply chain shocks and how decentralized actors use asymmetric warfare.
So opponents of relaxing the act are saying, are you kidding me?
Yes. They argue that relaxing this law right now is literally taking the locks off your doors during a neighborhood crime wave.
Oh, man. Yeah, taking the locks off during a fragile global period invites immense cognitive and political warfare.
It's terrifying. And all of these individual fires, the GAPS Act, the forums, the infiltration laws, they are all converging into one massive inferno.
Flashpoint 4, the 2026 local elections.
This is shaping up to be an absolute battleground, and it is framed entirely as livelihood versus sovereignty.
The KMT's electoral strategy is to frame this as a stark choice between peace and war.
Right. Vote for us, lower tensions, boost the economy.
But we have to look at the secondary effects. If the KMT succeeds in that framing and wins big, what signal does that send globally?
That is the million-dollar question. Will the international community interpret a democratic KMT victory as Taiwan voluntarily choosing a pro-China integrationist route?
And think about the ripple effects in Washington. We are dealing with a Trump administration now.
Right, and Trump views global alliances through a lens of pure transactional diplomacy.
He doesn't necessarily operate on historical loyalties or shared values. He looks at the ledger.
Exactly. So if Taiwan signals through its elections that it wants to cozy up to Beijing, does a transactional U.S. administration decide that Taiwan is no longer an asset worth protecting?
Does Taiwan suddenly become just a bargaining chip in a larger trade deal?
That is the ultimate danger of internal politics projecting external signals.
So if we tie this entire discussion together, the parallels back to the Middle East are just unavoidable.
They really are. In the Middle East, Iran challenges maritime borders through physical force and crypto piracy.
And in Asia, the CCP challenges the median line of the Taiwan Strait through relentless gray zone military flights and domestic legal maneuvers.
China acts as a pragmatic middleman for peace in the Middle East to secure their oil, while Trump views Taiwan through a lens of transactional value rather than democratic solidarity.
Both regions are suffering from extreme systemic vulnerability.
Yes, in the Middle East, that vulnerability looks like proxies, like Hezbollah, just shattering ceasefires overnight.
And in the Taiwan Strait, the vulnerability is the dangerous reliance on informal opposition party visits to Beijing.
Because official government-to-government communication has completely broken down.
It's a very precarious balance.
So, as we bring this deep dive home, what is the core takeaway here? Underneath all the political science jargon and the treaties and the economic acts.
I think fundamentally this whole debate boils down to something deeply emotional.
Really? How so?
It is a fundamental disagreement on how to love and protect Taiwan.
Oh, wow. That is a very human way to frame a really complex geopolitical issue.
But it's true, right? The KMT genuinely believes that the best way to show love and protect the island is to lock down the critical tech so it can't be stolen, speak softly and ambiguously to a powerful neighbor to avoid angering them, and open the doors for trade to build wealth.
Right. But the opposing side looks at those exact same actions and believes that playing nice and unlocking the doors is just rolling out the red carpet for a kidnapper.
It all comes back to the concept of symmetry or reciprocity in diplomacy.
Explain that a bit more.
Well, for decades, political ambiguity was a massive dividend for the region. It allowed everyone to save face, ignore the hard questions of sovereignty, and just focus on making money.
Now.
But in the hyperpolarized, high-stakes environment of 2026, that ambiguity is rapidly turning into a heavy, dangerous liability.
Yeah, because if you can't assert your sovereignty equally on an international stage, if you are forever relegated to only wearing your team's jersey in the basement, you naturally start sliding toward accepting the framework of the larger power.
Exactly. You lose yourself in their narrative. Without symmetry and mutual respect, ambiguity ceases to be a diplomatic tool. It just becomes submission.
So we return to that bitter cup of coffee we brewed at the start of the show.
It's definitely bitter.
When Cheng Li-1 visited that mausoleum in Nanjing, he was visiting the resting place of Sun Yat-sen. And Sun Yat-sen famously said, "The revolution is not yet successful."
A quote that still hangs heavy over the entire region over a century later.
It really does. Because in this massive geopolitical chess game, every single player, the U.S., China, the KMT, the current Taiwanese government, they all define the word success completely differently.
Which means the tension isn't going away anytime soon. It requires constant critical observation.
It does. And I want to leave all of you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Lay it on us.
We spent a lot of time today talking about governments, historical treaties, and political parties. But if the modern status quo is fundamentally defined by things like the Silicon Shield, semiconductor supply chains, and technological dominance,
Okay, I see where this is going.
will the next major geopolitical boundary actually be drawn by corporate boardrooms instead of national governments? Are tech CEOs becoming the new diplomats?
Oh, that is a profound question. It shifts the entire paradigm of how we view global power.
Something to think about while you finish your coffee. As always, we want to remind you that our channel values independent thinking.
Yes, we aren't here to tell you what to conclude. We're here to give you the mechanisms and the context to explore it yourself.
Keep questioning assumptions and always look at the structural forces beneath the headlines.
Because the more you understand the why and the how, the less chaotic the world seems.
Absolutely. If you enjoyed brewing up these ideas with us today, please enthusiastically hit that subscribe button for the Sip and Talk podcast.
And while you're exploring the internet, give a warm shout out to our good friend Mickey. Head over to his YouTube channel, Mickey to Life, to see his absolute latest amazing travel vlogs.
Yes. He always finds the most incredible spots around the world, and honestly, we could all use a little travel escapism after heavy topics like this one.
For sure.
Thank you so much for joining us on this Deep Dive Sip and Talkers, and we will see you next time.
See you guys.